Welcome to another edition of the brand called You. Today I have a very, very accomplished lady with me. Nina Chatrath, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Nina is the founder of Enhanced Consulting. She's worked with Heidrick and Struggles and Korn Ferry, and she's an MBA from XLRI. So, Nina, before this, we were chatting, and I know you've done a lot of work in multiple areas. Tell me about your early life.
So, early work life was really mostly about experiencing work, and it's also about experimenting. So, I think earlier on, I was not a very serious person in terms of I probably didn't have a concept of a career, So I was bright. I always got very well paid jobs. Even when I was coming out of school, I had a choice of, I could walk into medicine. I mean, I actually got admission into every single thing that I applied. And at the end of it, my father left the decision to me. I don't know, right or wrong. And I chose hotel management.
Okay.
Day two in the college, I thought that I'd walked into a disastrous decision, but I was just not able to roll back. There's no rolling back. And I said, let me make the most of it. And I moved ahead with life. And therefore, when I went into work also, it was about let me do the best that I can and let me move a step forward and let's see what the next day takes you to. So not a very thought through career path in my head, but it was more about multiple jobs. And I think the only thing that was interesting about my early professional years was that I made sure that I got something challenging. If it was challenging, it was meaningful, and I moved something from point A to point B, I was fine. But if it became mundane, I would just lose interest completely. So I kept going back to my boss and troubling them and saying, give me more, give me something different. And there was always a very funny, rebellious streak in me that kept showing up every now and then. And then over the years, I had a lot of very senior people whom I interacted with, mentors, call them for whatever, coaching me, talking to me. And I think the one word that came out was, why don't you build some stability into what you do? And that got my fancy, and by which time the children were also growing up. And then I became more sure-footed. And it's so ironic that it took a search firm to tell me to carve out a career out of life. And, while I'd done a huge amount of work by then, so there was early years of operations in the Taj, business role in the Taj, sales role rather. Then I moved into some amount of retail here and there, not very serious. Then I also did a stint with the .com, early years, heading marketing. I did a sabbatical with a public relations firm. And then I had a very interesting assignment in which I actually was with the Oberoi Group, handling McKinsey. So I was EA to Mr. Oberoi. Having said that, everything to do with the McKinsey study was something that I would filter through to him.
That must have been a fantastic experience.
So that's what changed my thinking. And, when you're interacting with McKinseyans, you kind of start looking at life very seriously.
Correct.
And at the end of it, then I went into process consulting, but then leadership consulting, and then on. It's been really
And then you spent a little time with two search firms also.
Well, that was a significant amount of time.
Okay. So my question to you on that is, that in this age of politically correct words, I remember in the 90s when I used to be approached, they used to be called headhunters.
Right.
And now they're called search firms. Why was the name changed?
So I don't think the name was changed. I think initially firms would actually headhunt.
Correct.
They would go to the promoter or a senior person with a list of people saying, these are the capable people that we know. And then they would look at the fit eventually, if when. Now, the world got a lot more serious. There were also new industries. There was telecom coming up, post-privatization. We've had a lot of action in the business world. Now it stood to reason that you need to have people who know the industry or even don't know the industry, but you need a thorough process of finding talent that would fit into the company. And I think that's the difference that happened. So from hunting for heads to searching in the market and the pool that existed.
So that's what made the change.
And very thorough, very process oriented, and engaging the customer at every step. And then then you take a call at the end of it. The stakes are so high. The business numbers stakes are so high. And eventually, I think over the years, we've seen that work out very well.
So tell me, since you spend a large amount of time in search firms, what exactly do you look for in a potential candidate when you are searching for him or hunting him?
Okay, there's a little fine distinction here between search and consulting.
Correct.
And I want to bring out this differentiation because I think most people don't understand larger part of what I do. So I was probably the only non-search person on the team.
Okay.
So let's look at it very simply. There's a buy, which is okay, go and get me the talent that we need for whatever X role. And then there is a build. And I think the search firms realized over a period of time that while I may continue to do the buy, how can I strengthen my top tier? And when you're strengthening your top tier, then you are continuing to look for competencies that are related to the market dynamics at that point of time, the context of business at that point of time.
Okay.
So let's look at, from FMCG, I know you come from FMCG industry. So from there to there is really a lot about qualifications,
Correct.
where have you been,
Correct.
blue chip, this, that, the other. And there is a very straightforward equation, right? You move out from Beckett, Brink, Kaiser, you move to Unilever or whatever. It's a straightforward equation. But look at it from a point of view of say, a telecom, while it was coming up. Where do you get the talent from?
Correct.
And would you imagine the person would fit in? So where is that organization at that point of time? Is it at a startup stage? Is it at a build stage? Is it at a scale-up stage? And consequently, the competencies that you need in a CEO for that role or that industry would differ.
So, just to continue for another minute or so on
Sure.
this, what would be some of the softer skills that you would look for? And the reason I'm asking you is because we've got thousands of people who are aspiring CEOs
Right.
watching us.
The softer skills, as we call them, is such a misnomer.
I
It's
agree.
a myth.
I agree.
They're the hardest to acquire.
Okay.
And I would not even want to take it to, there was a time when you talked about empathy, sympathy, and I'm like saying, okay, put that aside.
Correct.
Because not everybody is comfortable with that and not everybody wants to bring it to a business domain. But there are those skills where, can I read the room? Can I understand where people are coming from? Can I understand motivations of my team, especially at the senior level? And if I'm recruiting somebody whom I'm going to just pass over one full line of business, and I have a lot of stakes on that and there are investors involved, can he or she take the pressure?
Correct.
Can they be resilient enough? Can they go out there and get the right set of people and make a complementary set of competencies that stand for a leadership
Very
team?
interesting.
So I think the softer skills is also knowing what you don't know.
Correct.
There are so many times the CEOs are so arrogant that the arrogance walks ahead of them,
Absolutely.
right? And
Yes.
they're missing out on the point altogether.
Absolutely.
Unless I interact with juniors, etc., and what comes to my mind is a point of time where there's an MD of a very well-known company and he was doing some reverse mentoring and he reached out to me and he said, Nina, I don't think it's working. So I asked him a couple of questions. And I'm saying, how is it going to work? If you're going to stand tall in front of them and put this huge desk in front of them and you, what are they going to mentor you
Correct.
on?
Correct.
They're so intimidated by you. So as today, we live in such tough times. As a CEO today, are you linked into what's going on?
Correct.
And the whole digitization,
Yeah.
the entire social media space, the youngsters are so much better equipped.
I agree.
So how do you reach out to them? How do you forge equations
Correct.
which are not intimidating, but they're coming from here? Obviously, you come carrying the power. There's no one's taking that away from you.
Sure.
But how do you build relationships? I think that's the softer
Correct.
part.
Correct. So let's move to your consulting business, Enhance Consulting.
Right.
Tell me about the scope of work of your consulting organization.
So, I have a very funny employee mindset. I love my salary at the end of the month.
Sure.
So when I stepped out on my own, which is because, I wanted to be on boards, I wanted to change my orbit, I was getting bored, I didn't like the protocols anymore. Consulting for me is really about, as an individual, as a consultant, when I go to an organization, I said, what can I do for you, which is meaningful for you? Now, as an organization, I would walk to a company and says, what is meaningful to you? And where do I see the gap? And I think that's the gap I kind of fill in.
Okay.
I'll give you some of the projects that I've taken on, way beyond I thought I wouldn't be able to handle them. But like taking on a project in Saudi Arabia. It's a Saudi Arabian organization with 30 nationalities working there, and they're reinventing the entire strategy.
Wow.
So from the strategic point of view, what are the lines of business? So I would partner in with the strategic company which is handling that. But having said that, what is the new organization structure going to look at? And can we take 200 odd senior people, put them through some assessments, and place them back into a new organization structure? So that's the width and depth. And this kind of a project would take me about a year and a half to really put it to rest.
Yeah.
And then the phase one would start, which is really about, now that we've got these senior people on their senior roles, how do we have a coaching mechanism that makes them successful in those roles?
Yeah.
Now, for me to handle a project like that, I don't believe in, I believe that the client needs to get the best. And that does not mean I know the best. So I align with individuals who are, running small organizations, but are very credible in their space. So I line up, and like on this project, I have somebody from organizational behavior space, someone who's a Lebanese, one Tunisian, one Egyptian, a British lady. So I have that subset. So from this side, we have this complementary skill set, and that can bring to bear for the client.
Fair enough. So, when I was reading about you, I found two interesting phrases. One is that, robust leadership.
Okay.
And the second was leadership talent benchmarking.
All right.
Help me understand these terms.
Right. Okay. So a robust leadership could mean many things. You're absolutely right. But is there robustness in your leadership as it exists currently?
Correct.
Is there also going to be robustness in the leadership going forward? So are we future oriented? So what may work today for an organization from a leadership perspective may not necessarily work in a tomorrow
And
perspective.
robust is not bottom line driven. Or is that also a factor?
Could be, and yes and no, right? I'm a consultant.
Yeah.
So.
I understand. And my job is to ask you questions.
Absolutely. But succession planning is at the core of it.
Correct. Okay.
Do you have business? If as a promoter, or even if I'm running a multinational outfit here in India, I need to ensure that there's business continuity.
Correct.
And with the headwinds that I face, I shouldn't just get eliminated, right? So am I looking ahead strategically, which most companies do, but the intersection of that with talent is where they miss out. And that's the space that I occupy.
Okay.
Robustness in terms of leadership to allow a company to remain successful.
Correct.
And to exist, actually. Today we have an existential crisis in many companies,
I agree.
right? Yeah, so
It's a serious crisis.
it is
And I
definitely.
coach a few CEOs and I see the same issues coming over and over again.
Yeah, and Ashutosh, I'm sure you'll agree with me when I say this. There are times when you talk about them, say, what after you? Their eyes glaze.
Yeah.
So they have no clue. And so many people think that they're here forever. And that's one thing I've learned of life.
I agree.
Everything.
I agree.
You can't take anything for granted.
Absolutely. So let's keep talking about, all
I'm
the
sorry,
work.
you asked me another question on the talent benchmarking,
benchmarking,
right? Yeah. And this is really about knowing how you are pitched vis-a-vis competition,
Correct.
vis-a-vis obvious competition and insidious competition.
Competition within or
Outside,
in the entire
outside,
universe.
with the universe. So today, as we talk, we're talking about, say, let me just take an example of this whole mobile payment space, right? Or an online payment space, So while Paytm may lead, there are many others who are following, and therefore it stands to reason that I may want to poach from them. And therefore, have I benchmarked my talent?
Correct.
Do I know where I stand vis-a-vis talent?
Okay.
And benchmarking it to the market, benchmarking it to industry, benchmarking it to obvious, things that I don't even understand today. So HR is in organizations are very, very, very sure-footed when it comes to industry benchmarks, but I don't think they go beyond
Correct.
unless they have a mandate to do so.
Very
So I think
interesting.
talent benchmarking is critical today
Right.
because you can lose your talent, and if you lose your talent at times, there's so much of power resting and so many decision making.
And such a huge investment goes into each individual.
Absolutely.
I agree. So let's keep moving. You work with so many people, you've got so many years of working with multiple organizations. Um, Tell me, how does executive behavior impact motivation, engagement, and performance?
I want to flip this around.
Okay,
I think if I'm motivated, if I'm engaged, then I would tend to perform well.
better.
So let's take those three areas first.
Correct.
And if I were to bring in the behavior part, and I have gone on record, but even many times before, saying, um, as opposed to when I started working and I've seen environments, today I think we're moving into the world of creating environments which are fairly toxic. And I'm using a very
Sure,
strong word
sure.
here. And they're toxic, and it's the behavior of executive and the managers out there which is leading to that toxicity. And a lot of times we don't realize what impact that may have on,
Correct.
say, an incumbent who walks into the organization, experiences this. You're not averse to it. Many years ago, I worked with Mr. Oberoi, and I remember I would tremble at times. He would be brilliant most times, but those few times when he wouldn't be in the best of moods, he's not realizing the impact that it may have. And similarly, I think in organizations today,
Yes.
that behavior, and I'm coaching one managing director. You know what his nickname is in the organization? They call him a sloth bear.
Wow.
And so he's a tall gentleman, and he walks around with his arms, and they feel that arm can even slice somebody. And I'm not we're not getting sliced physically,
I
obviously,
know,
but mentally and emotionally, and the resilience that people have, or their ability to stretch. I may want to happily stretch and work, and that's the environment I've always loved. But if I have an executive behavior which is not allowing me to do so, then can you imagine the impact it's going to have on performance and eventual business results?
I agree. I agree
So,
with you.
yeah, very good question. I hope I haven't.
No, you have. I think you've given a very good answer. So I'm going to move on.
Sure.
You serve on several boards.
Sure.
How do you select which board you want to be on?
Interesting question. You do know that there is a woman's quota,
I know.
right? So that gives you the privilege of getting those boards approaching you. Having said that, the selection is completely in your hands. I think one of the first things that I look for very strongly is transparency.
Correct.
And I'm coming at the board from a point of view of area of expertise being something that boards usually are more focused on the financial angles, right? The quarter-on-quarter
Correct.
results and maybe strategic up to a point. But when it comes to the talent, there is not so much of a conversation as one would like it to be. So for me, I also want to know, specifically for me, I'm sure it may differ for someone who's coming from a finance background, is that do they have those holistic discussions?
Okay.
Are they even a conversation on the board level? Is the organization looking at the leadership tier? Are they looking at succession planning? Are they looking at continuity in those aspects? Are they identifying those leaders? So if I have my conversation with, say, even a promoter or even the managing director or whatever the powers that be, and if I get the sense that, yes, they're concerned, or there is a modicum of interest there, then I'm willing to talk further. The other thing that really matters to me is transparency. And I think the moment in my conversation, I'm going to ask some straightforward questions. And if I'm going to be hoodwinked around, then I'm uncomfortable.
And as a non-executive director,
Yes.
you have the same fiduciary responsibility as an executive director. So
Absolutely.
transparency is critical.
Absolutely. I was there at Directors Connect at one of these management consulting firms just 2 days ago. And I think that's a question that came up again and again because while I may be very invested, would I want to take on that onerous
Correct.
responsibility? And I could be in the coolers, right? It's as basic as that. Right?
Absolutely.
But having said that, if you're there, then you jolly will take the responsibility.
Oh, absolutely. You can't
Then
say
you
that
can't
I
run
didn't
away
know.
from it. Yes,
Absolutely.
yes, yes. And then it's up to you how you question and that's how the transparency, the questions that you ask, do you get the right kind of answers? And if I'm probing, is the issue being skirted? And the ability to make that strong comment on the board, right? I mean, I think that's
I agree.
important. I mean, if there's something that I do not get, and it's only for my clarification, but in that, I would sense a host of things.
Very interesting. So one more question before I move to some questions of gender balance and then some questions for you personally. Millennials, the world is now entirely millennials who are coming into the workforce or spent 10, 11 years. In all the organizations that you work with, what is your experience of how are millennials changing the workplace environment and the organizations?
It's interesting you asked me that question because currently I work very closely with two businesses which are medium size and the second generation is coming in.
Okay.
So I think millennials may want to make a lot of changes happen. I think the combo of the two, the tango of the two generations makes it more balanced. So I may have a lot of ideas that I may want to experiment with. And it really stands to reason that I should be allowed to do it, right? The promoter's done it or the seniors have done it and they've kind of experimented. So I think the agility in the organization to be able to absorb those small experiments would be key.
Okay.
So I kind of push them towards, let's do a pilot, let's check it out, but let's not throw it out of the window, right? Because then every generation would know better because eventually they would be steering the business ahead.
Correct.
And this the two families that I work with, they're bright youngsters. They're really, really bright. And at times they take the winds away from my sail.
Correct.
And they know what they're talking about. So I think the question about, listen, let's probe this further. Why don't you go and get the right kind of qualifications? You should be able to make that point and be able to back it up with logic and evidence.
Correct.
As opposed to just, a trial balloon.
Correct.
But even the trial balloons should be allowed. Because if you don't allow them, then you're stodgy and you stayed. And then who knows when the end will come.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I think I'm very much for millennials. I root for them all the time.
Good. So my next question to you is on gender balance.
Yes.
I've sat on several global boards and, Scandinavian countries accepted the need for gender balance many, many years ago.
Right.
Last 7-8 years in India, it's becoming much more prominent. But yet I keep getting feedback from a lot of women that a lot has to be done. What are your thoughts on expediting or speeding up gender balance in our country, in the corporate world?
Right. That's a very specific question. Now, I have a couple of thoughts on that, and I have fairly strong thoughts.
Yep.
My opinions are fairly strong on this. And if you notice on my card, I also carry an acronym called WLQ, which is Women Leadership Quotient.
Okay.
And I firmly believe that organizations need to have that balance, regardless of which industry you're in, right? There's no place where a woman ought not to be allowed, because I think we're beyond those times completely and totally. Now, the numbers are not good and they're not looking good. I will look at it from a couple of lenses. From the board lens, I would say, I think the question is that do you have enough women at senior leadership levels who have done their executive stints to be able to get that exposure and be able to make meaningful contributions on the boards? There are very few of them. So I think they're fine when they say, well, where is the clutch of women? There are barely any, right? Now it comes back to the organization. In the hierarchy at every level, I see the numbers start dwindling. And they dwindle for many reasons, social reasons. I think the biological clocks and the professional clocks have now kind of synchronized in a very odd way. I have a woman who's head of marketing at 40, delivering a child and trying to do justice to her job. And you have a maternity leave that says 6 months that she can be away. The organization says, how can I warm that seat for 6 months without her presence? World has moved from point A to point B. So they have their point of view. The woman has her point of view. When she comes back, they find it very difficult to plug in. So I think the couple of things that organization ought to do is, and it's not just in word, but truly in spirit. How do you handhold? And I'm sorry, I'm using a strong word, but you need to handhold them at those points of time. So there are 3 circles. One is what the organization can do in terms of policies, procedures, thinking, etc. What is their way of looking at it? And make more and more things happen so that it's important for her to come back, and it's meaningful for her to come back. The other circle that I see is what that she ought to be doing. So there's enough and more work to be done out there. When I speak with these women, they take the easier way out.
Correct.
I hate to say this.
Correct.
And if they're not economically contributing to their household, it's all right because, everybody's flushed with funds, etc. And she says, why must I slog so much? So I think there is this whole thinking about they're taking the easier route out. And I talk to them, I bust my ass, I'm sorry, every day, pardon my French. And I do it incessantly on a daily basis. But women, when they get the choice and I remember when my son was 4, my daughter was 6 months old, and I had a new house, 4th of July, it was my son's birthday. And I remember sitting back and my husband told me, Nina, it's now or never. And on the 27th of July, I was in a job.
Wonderful.
And I had to do that to myself.
Correct.
And that's the point I make on the women. The third circle is the external intervention to both. Organizations may get a little stuck in their thinking. Women may get a little stuck in their thinking. And therefore, there is this whole circle of external advisors to the organization and to the individuals.
Okay.
And I think that is where also we need the other advocacy, for want of a better word. I remember back in Corn Ferry, I had taken on the mantle of 100 people in the leadership development for over a year. It was a very beautiful project that we kind of created and carved out. In there were 2 women out of 100. And I'm talking about a few years ago.
Sure.
I did not hesitate to go to the MD and said that, and I'd had these conversations, those coaching conversations with 2 women, and both looked suspect to me. And I did not hesitate. I spoke directly to the MD, confidential conversation. I said, you cannot let them go for want of role models for the entire organization.
Very good.
So there are many things that need to be done.
agree.
I hope I've answered.
No, you've answered my questions. I only have time for 2 more questions for
Surely.
you. And these are going to be little personal questions for you. So my next question is that what would be 3 words that define Nina?
Okay. So I think without a shadow of doubt, high energy, incessant. That's one.
Yeah.
Across areas, it's not just work,
Correct.
but life as well. The second one would be very high resilience. I'm very comfortable with failures. I think probably I've reached a point where I'm comfortable with failures. And if it doesn't work, move on, learn from it and move on, right? And the third would probably be, I'm a very highly optimistic person.
Wonderful.
I feel the best is yet to come, always.
Wonderful.
So I think these are the 3.
Wonderful. So my last question to you is on failure.
Right.
And I love asking this question from every guest.
Right.
Because I have a hypothesis and I have a book coming out on failure, my hypothesis is that Indians particularly and Asians in general don't teach our children that it's okay to fail.
Yeah.
And this manifests itself in many, many ways, and yet we fail all the time.
Right.
What have been your learnings from some of your mistakes or your failures?
So I think if you're talking about just the learning specifically, I think I really have learned over the years to decode, to do a postmortem. I never used to do that earlier.
Okay.
I used to take it very personally. But the moment I depersonalized the issue, I moved to the postmortem saying, what could have been differently, as opposed to saying what could have I done differently, but what are the environments, and so investing yourself more in what's really going on there. And then there are some things that you just cannot do, and you have to accept that.
Correct.
I'm a mere mortal. Now, I'll give you a very funny example, but no matter how hard I try, and I've been to a catering college, for crying out loud, but I can't cook. And it's my biggest failing. And my children laugh at me. And so I cook to get by, but I want to be a gourmet cook.
Yeah.
Now, you know what? I have to accept the fact that, it's not there in your hands, and just give it up. So what are the compensatory behaviors,
Correct.
for lack of a better word,
Correct.
that I can deploy? What are my workarounds? So that I kind of focus more on my strengths. And I say that these are some of the things that may not develop in me, and it's all right. It's okay. I think that's the acceptance.
No, that's wonderful. That's very, very well said. I love the word compensatory behavior. So for failure, I think I've not heard this before, but that's fantastic. So Nina, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashutosh.
It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. you, and good luck
Likewise.
with all your high energy and all the boards that you're working on.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You podcast. Be sure to visit tbcy.in to join the conversation, access show notes, and discover fantastic bonus content. You can follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Simply search for The Brand Called You. Thank you and see you next week.